In this video, we will continue covering chapter 8.4 of the book Spring Boot Quick Start. More precisely, we will cover this basic example that shows how to use Finder methods. The main focus point of this example is a person repository where we will add additional 3 Finder methods. In order to be able to query our person entities by using different criteria. So, this finder method allows us to find person records by person name. And since multiple records could have the same name, we are expecting to get a list of person entities. And this finder method needs one input parameter to specify the name we are looking for. The second finder method is actually the same as previous. It's just that the name is a little bit different because between find and by keywords we could insert any string and the finder method will behave the same. So this method again finds a person by name, but here we are assuming that only one person with such name will exist in a database, so we are expecting for the finder method to return a single person entity. And again, finder method needs single input parameter because for the name property. And this last finder method finds person by both name and age, and therefore it needs two input parameter when the order of input parameters is used to populate these properties. So this input parameter will be used to define the name we are looking for, and this input parameter will be used to find age we are looking for. So these names of input parameters are irrelevant because input parameters are matched with the properties in the order they are given and the name is ignored. In order to be able to use these finder methods to get some data from the database, we will create this load persons Java class that implements command line runner, which will be executed when we start our application. And inside its run method, we will simply load some person entities into the database so that we could later fetch them with our finder methods. Just to recap, this is our person entity with these three properties, and we will also define this custom constructor which we will use in the load persons to more easily specify entities and load them into the database. Now inside our controller we will have few endpoints, and each endpoint will be calling one of the finder methods defined in the repository so that we could test the behavior of those finder methods. So here we have a find person by ID that calls find by ID method. This is a default method of the person repository that will be included in the repository by default. In other words, find by ID will be already included in this class and we didn't actually have to explicitly declare it. This is the method that we get by default and that is able to retrieve a person entity by specifying the value of the primary key. And primary key in our person entity is this, as annotated with ID annotation. Our second entity, endpoint find by name, we'll call findByName finder method in order to find all the records with the name John. And since in our database we will have 2 records with that name, we expect to have a list of person. So in our load persons class, we have loaded 2 person entities with the name John, and then these 2 will be returned. And this is the finder method that we are calling, and that returns a list of persons. So find by name. So next we have find person by name, and here we are trying to find a person with name Bill, and in our database there is only one such record, so it is okay to use this person, this finder method that will give us a single person, because this finder method is defined here and as so that it should return a single person record. And finally, with this endpoint, we are testing the behavior of finder method find person by name and age, and we are looking for all person entities with this combination of name and age. Again, we are expecting to get a single person entity as a result, as defined by that finder method. Again, here we are expecting to get a single person. We can now test our application by using Google Chrome web browser. So if we call the first endpoint that uses this finder method, then this endpoint uses find by ID to get the person entity with ID 1. And in our case, this is the record that has been inserted first. So this is a person John with age 20. And this is what our endpoint will return, a person with name John and age 20. Then we call our second endpoint that uses find by name finder method, and it looks for person entities with this name, and since we have 2 records with this name, and this finder method will return a list of person as defined here. And since we have 2 person records with name John, we will get those 2 records. And our entity will store these records in a list of person and then return this list in a JSON format, which is shown here. So by calling this endpoint, which calls finder method with this name, we are returned all records with name John. Our third endpoint can be called by using this URL, and with it we can test following finder method, which finds again a person by name, but in this endpoint we are looking for a person record with the name Bill, and since there is only one such record loaded into the database, we will get as a return value that record in a JSON format. So this is the endpoint that we are talking about, that uses find person by name and looking for a person with a name Bill. We are expecting a single person to be returned because we have loaded only one person record with name Bill. And the finder method that we are here using is this one, that returns a single person entity based on the name it was given. And to test our final endpoint, we can use this URL, and inside the endpoint we will be calling finder method with this name, where we are looking for a person record with a specific combination of name and age. And in our case, we will be looking for a person with name John and age 20, and therefore our finder method will return a single person entity. So this is this last endpoint that uses this finder method to find person entity with this name and age. Name and age. And we have loaded only one record in our database with this combination of name and age, and therefore this record will be returned. So again, we are now calling this last finder method that takes two input parameters, name and age. So in this tutorial we have seen some basic example of how to specify additional finder methods, how to use properties from the entity and combine them with keywords to retrieve specific entities from the database, and how to define return values from these entities to be able to work with them.